Seeing quorum in the room, I would like to call this meeting to order, and I wish to acknowledge that our meeting is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. I would like to thank the Algonquin Nation for hosting us on their land. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Trustee Schwartz, seconded by Trustee Campbell. Is there any discussion on the agenda? If not, I'll call the question on the agenda as presented. All those in favor? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Next up, I would like to invite Superintendent Olga Grigoriev to come forward. And Director?
So at this point, what we would like to do is we would like to acknowledge Superintendent Grigoriev's retirement. Superintendent Grigoriev has been with us since 2012, but started her career as a classroom teacher, vice principal, principal, and has made many, many contributions to education. I've only gotten to know Olga over this past year, and her commitment to students, student learning, innovation, engagement has been incredibly evident, not just in words, but in practice. And so at this point, we would really like to congratulate you, Olga, on a long and illustrious career, a career that has had impact on not only children, but families, communities, teachers, and those principals and vice principals that you have mentored and grown. So on behalf of the district, we want to thank you for your contribution to us, but as educators and education leaders, we want to thank you for your contribution to the profession and to the communities that you have served. This is well deserved. We look forward to hearing your stories of the journeys that go forward, because I know that there will be many. But at this point, we want to wish you the very, very best. Congratulations.
Just to add to what the director has said, I had the privilege of having Olga as superintendent of instruction for the schools in West Carleton when she was first appointed as one of our superintendents of instruction in the OCDSB. And she never failed to be there when she was needed, despite the weather and some of the rather interesting roads that she had to contend with from time to time. Later on, she was our superintendent of learning support services for a number of years and really tried very hard to bring some innovations of practice and to bring some new thinking into that department, which has stood us in good stead ever since. So thank you very much, Olga, for everything that you've done for us over time.
This is a surreal moment, I have to say. It seems very strange to be up here looking at my career and saying goodbye to it. I have to say I've been honored to serve in this capacity. It's, I think, some of the most meaningful work that you can do, and I've had the privilege of doing that in 2 boards, and I've had the extreme privilege of working with very competent and very talented people and engaged trustees in this district, for sure, in the service of students. And that has always been my prime motivator, and I know it's yours too. Frank retired not that long ago, and I want to echo some of what he said. I think that the district is in great hands. I look at our director, I look at our trustees, I look at our new superintendents coming on board, and it is a great moment when you can pass the baton and say, you see a bright future ahead for everybody. So good luck to you in your next work, and thank you for the experience.
I would like to now to move on to a presentation on evidence of practice and invite Superintendent Mary Jane Farish to come forward to present her report and to introduce our guests.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'd just like to take the moment to introduce the item and introduce Superintendent Farish. We have the opportunity this evening to hear from one of our schools around the work that has been done around innovation of practice. Most significantly, I hope that trustees will find value in the conversation about relevant learning for our students when we think about not only our exit outcomes, but the fact that we are preparing citizens of the future for this community as well as our global communities. This evidence of practice certainly brings forward an example, a great example of relevant and meaningful engagement for our students that pertain to the work and the needs of our community. So at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Superintendent Farish, who will introduce the item, and then to our students, who will certainly share the work that they have done.
Thank you, Director. It's a real privilege to be able to shine a spotlight on this learning, this experiential learning this evening. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the staff members who are engaged in leadership of the Farm to Cafeteria initiative. Alan Abbey, horticultural teacher, Derek Brez, science and music teacher, Craig Gehrig, a teacher in the GLP program, Mark Jelinas, teacher in the woodworking and construction program, Brad Larrabee, kitchen manager, Fred Billings, chef, and Tatiana Vorobej, head of the department and leader of the Advanced Culinary Education program, SHISM program at Sir Guy. You can see from the listing of the staff engaged in this initiative that it is truly cross-curricular and multi-department engaged. And I want to take a moment just to outline what a SHISM program means so that we understand how this is connected to relevant learning and to career. So with the SHISM program, students take a bundle of courses, 8 to 10 courses, in an area of focus, of interest towards them. They also earn certifications and industry qualifications, and they have cooperative education experiences. So when they graduate, they also earn a seal, a SHISM seal, as part to honor and show their accomplishments. SHISM programs are accessible for students in the apprenticeship, college, university, or workplace pathways. We wanted to make special note of how this experiential learning is sustainable in our district and can be replicated in other sites. And you'll see in the report that we have outlined in greater detail the components of the sustainability and also how this program can be replicated on a scale in classrooms in other sites. We definitely rely on partnerships. One of the main partnerships is with ONFI, with their garden classrooms. And we also are building and developing greater partnerships within the gardening community or community garden network in Ottawa. And we look forward to increased opportunities there. The Sir Guy staff have also been able to build capacity in other school sites, and they're currently working with elementary schools to be bringing a growing program or initiative with gardens into classrooms. There are also grant opportunities within the community, and that really does root, pun intended, this learning into community partnerships and on a local, provincial, and federal level, we are engaged and can continue to be engaged in this experiential learning. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Principal Blakely of Sir Guy Carleton, and she will introduce the students who are with us this evening, as well as the staff who are able to come. And I'd like to thank the families who made it possible for students to be here, and for a few family members who are here with us in the audience tonight as well.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Blakely. I am the very proud principal at Sir Guy Carleton Secondary School. Thank you for inviting us. We'd like to take a few short minutes to tell you about our Farm to Calf program. But first, I'd like to introduce a few people who have envisioned and championed and labored to create a culture of innovation and social responsibility at Sir Guy that has created experiential learning opportunities for our students, raised awareness about food sustainability and safety, and contributed to healthy food choices for all. With us this evening is the key team of staff, or almost the key team of staff. We have a few illnesses, largely responsible for the success of our Farm to Calf program. First and foremost, Derek Brez. He is our head of science, math, and physical education, and champion of our urban farming schism. Mr. Brez secured a Farm to Calf grant for $8,000 and sought out community partners to support the success of the program. Brad Larrabee is our assistant chef at Sir Guy, who has been creative in how to best utilize the produce grown in and around our school and introducing that fresh produce in interesting and tasty ways in our school cafeteria. Tatiana Vorbe, who is unable to be with us this evening. Ms. Vorbe is the head of culinary arts and our teacher champion for our advanced culinary arts program. Schism program. She has worked with our kitchen team and culinary students to plan food choices and use the ingredients grown in our greenhouse and our gardens. Mr. Mark Jelena, who is our construction and woodworking teacher, he's unable to attend this evening as well, but he and his students built the raised gardens around our school and have made things like charcuterie boards, which you will see in a little bit, for the culinary program when they do their serving. We also have with us 4 specialist high skills major students and their families. We have Zach Wells, who's grade 12, Schism in our culinary arts program. We have Aiden Jones, grade 11, Schism student in our culinary arts program. Katrina Bell, grade 12, Schism student in our urban farming Schism. And Kayla Baker, who is a grade 11 Schism student in our urban farming as well. I'd like to take a minute to show you a very short video, and then I'd like to bring the kids up so that they can take a minute or two to talk to you about what their experiences have been. First, I'd like to introduce Aiden Jones.
So I have seen all kinds of products come from our gardens, especially the herbs that have been produced to help fuel a lot of our breads and other products that we make to sell or give away for as samples. Some of the examples are spicy chili oil that we made using fresh chilies that were grown throughout the summertime and towards the start of fall, as well as some pesto bread that we sold during our Back to Our Roots sale. Most of the food that is sold through our CAF to students and staff are grown and then cooked inside of our school, and this completes the farm to CAF cycle. One of the most interesting things I find about the farm to CAF cycle is the way that we use the vegetable scraps and peelings from our program to help refuel the farm side of the cycle to help put more soil into growing the foods, which then again completes the farm to CAF cycle.
I'd like to introduce Zach Wells.
Hello. My first experience with the farm to calf cycle was the free salad bar we did last May, and we used the lettuce, tomatoes, and other vegetables to give a free lunch to the kids who could not bring their own lunch from home, and that way they could still have food to help them out with the rest of their day. And then also, at the beginning of this semester, we were able to get fresh herbs, more lettuce, tomato, kale, and other such vegetables to use in our cooking. So that way it saves some of the cost, because that way we can use the extra money to buy new equipment and further the program. And then I would also like to talk about the dual credit program that we do at our school, and that allows the kids from our school to go to college and get a few credits there and get some higher level learning, and then also you get to keep some of the credits you do there, and we'll save you some of the money whenever you go to college. Okay.
I'd like to introduce Katrina Bell.
In year one, the class prepped our outside gardens by gathering soil and made compost. We had a community partner named Tom, who is a master gardener who came to help us plan and build the gardens. We worked with our construction class to build the raised gardens that we made for people in wheelchairs at our school. We also got to choose what we planted in our gardens. For example, we planted red and purple tomatoes, and I've never seen them before then. And then the GLPs got to help out too, and they seemed to very much enjoy that. And this fall we harvested what we planted and gave it to Chef Brad, and we ended up cutting costs of the food, which helped them out.
Thanks, Katrina. And I'd like to introduce Kayla Baker.
In order to grow the food for the school, we have an aquaponic system and hydroponic towers to grow food inside. The aquaponic system uses water and fish to fertilize the produce. First, we go get the fish. Right now, we are using goldfish. When the food grows enough, we collect it and bring it to the kitchen to help with meals prepared for the students. For example, we grow some kale, basil, and microgreens.
Thank you very much for inviting us. We brought some treats for you, so we're just going to distribute those. And happy holidays to everybody. Thank you.
And I will ask you not to go away too far, because there will be questions from trustees in a moment as well, and they could be questions to any of you. If we'd like to just take a tiny moment here before we get into questions. That was certainly an unexpected set of treats for us this evening. Thank you very much for that. I do have a question coming from Trustee Fisher first. Trustee Fisher?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the students and staff for coming tonight. It's often a rare opportunity. We actually get to scratch the surface a bit and see some of the fantastic things that are going on in our schools. And I think as it relates to this particular program, I'm just blown away in terms of what you've been able to put together, within the school, across the community, and across the departments. We need to do more of this, not just in the urban farming area, green industries, but innovation, coding, technology. I think these are the things that, ultimately, make our schools the centerpiece of such great learning. So kudos for doing what you're doing. I guess the question I had is I noticed that there are a number of ongoing challenges that relates to the programming, particularly funding. There's a grant that's finishing. There's challenges around busing. I guess when you look at those challenges in total, in sum, what can we do as a board to help you think through how to overcome those challenges? Whether it's in the board itself, whether it's through our collective network as trustees. I know for myself, with the work that I do in my day-to-day world, I do a lot of work with the agriculture, agri-food sector in Ontario and across the Great Lakes. So if I know somebody that I can connect you to that might have a resource that can help, I want to be able to do that. So how can we help you, both as a board or individually, in trying to overcome some of these challenges to make sure that this not only sustained, but this program grows, within Sir Guy, but perhaps across the district. So I don't know who wants to take that on, but kudos for you for putting this together. It's fantastic.
First off, I think we need to have a conversation, you and I, about how we can make a greater connection here. And really, the best support we can have is whoever you know. Really, we're in the early stages still of this whole program. We're really looking 5 years down the line of what sustainability really looks like in our building. And we think we've built a model that will be fairly sustainable on a very reasonable budget. And that's been the goal since day one. And I realize we have some very unique resources. But really, it's the opportunity to talk to people who have expertise in the fields of food production, in the fields of marketing, and the connections within the community, right? That's something we always struggle with, is who do we talk to in the community? And that's been a brilliant connection through Onfi and Tom Marcantonio, our master gardeners, Carly Shelk at the Urban Element. But it's really trying to find people to talk to and help kind of guide us along the lines.
And just if I can, Madam Chair, do you have a mini business plan or a strategic plan? Like, if you looked out 5 years to say, like, this is what we're trying to do. So, in terms of being able to explain it to other people, that you've got something that I can grab onto to say, hey, listen, our board is doing this. Can you help? Is there something there that you'd be able to share potentially?
We don't have anything formalized at this stage. What we do have is a plan in terms of production of food for our school. And that's really been our focus, is how we can streamline our production to maximize the produce for the kids. The ultimate dream is if we can offer a breakfast program to kids free of charge, why can't we offer them a salad program at lunch free of charge as well for our at-risk kids? We have capacity to grow 500 heads of lettuce at a time. We should be able to feed kids And that's kind of the goal. So that's why I say we're still in the early stages here.
Maybe we can work together on a one-pager that I can send around to people if that's helpful.
Thank you, Trustee Fisher. Trustee Schwartz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two questions, one for staff, and thank you very much for bringing.
I have more questioners, Trustee
Yeah.
Schwartz, so if you
So
could
no, I
try
have
to
one
keep
question for
keep it
staff
to
and one for the students. So one question for staff is, what would it take to actually replicate something like this? We've got, like, for example, Gloucester High School has a greenhouse, although we're still waiting for it to be sort of finished and updated. But aside from having a greenhouse and having the land to be able to grow outdoors, what are the other pieces required? And then really the question for the kids is, based on a program like this, do you see yourselves working in the future in urban farming? Do you see yourselves running a small business where you're at farmers markets selling goods? Do you see yourselves more in the culinary arts side of things? I'm just really curious how a program like this is helping you think about your futures and the workplace that you want to be in.
Who wants to start? Perhaps if we just ask our students one at a time, we can begin with any one of you in terms of what you see as your future in terms of this learning.
So whenever I do graduate, I really want to get into urban farming because I want to make a difference in sustainable farming and showing a difference on how to grow different foods in different ways instead of the standard way. And I really do want to make a difference in people's lives.
When I graduate, I want to be an exterior designer, so I want to design people's gardens, maybe put some like trees and like a bunch of like a vegetable garden or orchard or something along those lines that I think people would enjoy and want to spend time with.
I've always wanted to sort of go into baking. I've really enjoyed the fact that you can really have any freedom with it. You can put anything you really want as long as it goes along with what you already have. So far I've found that making different breads, adding a vegetable to it tends to work. So for example, making an onion loaf. So just cutting up a bunch of onions, caramelizing them, and then putting them in. So, yeah. Nope.
After I graduate, I want to go to college and then get my red seal, because then I can work at a higher end restaurant and then work there for a few years and then hopefully open up my own restaurant.
And in terms of the question to staff?
The model could definitely be replicated. To which scale really depends on the facilities and resources available. But there's absolutely this a similar model, maybe not exactly the same, could be replicated in just about any school, greenhouse or not.
And next I have Trustee Jenikins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have you built relationships with the colleges? Algonquin Culinary Program, George Brown College has an amazing program. Perhaps they can help with ideas for moving the program forward.
This is something we haven't dove into too much. However, I was a student at Sir Guy, graduated, went to Algonquin, and then came back to Sir Guy, and now I work here, or work at Sir Guy. However, they did some really amazing things when I was a student over there that I definitely would like to try to get into contact with a few different professors to see if we can kind of make a connection for a few certain things and see if we can get that to work.
And I think I'll be generous tonight. We had one more questioner. I think we can squeeze it in if it's not too long, and that's Trustee Penny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question has already been answered.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being patient with our questions. I'd like to invite Trustee Campbell to thank our presenters. It's always great when we can be grounded in what is actually happening out there in our schools as we begin our meetings. Next is another form of grounding. I would like to invite our student trustees to present us with their December report.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair. I will get started by giving a quick introduction to our first of 2 biannual reports this school year. So looking at previous reports done by student trustees before us, we wanted to build on the base that they had laid. So when looking through this report, you'll notice that we've included quite a decent section to student recommendations. So diving right into it, it's the result of our desire to stay engaged with students, and how that manifested was roundtable discussions at as many of our high schools and as many of those feeder schools as we can. So far, I do not have a list in front of me, but I think we've hit about 7 of our high schools and 2 of our feeder schools, hearing from a diverse range of students in academic applied, in IB, in trades. We've heard a lot of voices. So I will let Prasith dive into exactly how we structured this in the report, but I do want to stress that these student recommendations that we've brought forward are the direct and general voice of the board. These are things that we hear at every school, that we hear from one-on-one interactions in our own schools, and things that are dominating students' minds in regard to our educational life.
So a lot of these roundtables were quite eye-opening because students would actually bring a lot of the same things in different schools without us prompting it. So it's kind of curious how while many of the schools we visited were diverse, a lot of the students are thinking quite the same things. So with our generation and students in general these days, the environment is one of those big ticket issues. And it's kind of funny, without fail, at each one of the roundtables, we heard from students that there was an interest in supporting compost programs. So one of our recommendations is when janitorial contracts are reviewed for next time, it would be really important to make sure that there would be some wording around composting in there. Another thing that we really heard in general was that the cafeterias have a big room for improvement on the ecological side. A lot of businesses we've seen in the private sectors are moving towards eco-friendly practices, and I think, students think that when the next contract is developed, because at each one of these roundtables we explain that the cafeterias are managed by a contract, and when this contract is updated, a lot of students would appreciate if eco-friendly consciousness is included. And finally, there are many student groups themselves, the clubs and the associations that are working on these initiatives themselves. And as a board, I guess it would be to connect these groups together and really support them in each one of the schools. Transportation was another one of those issues where, without fail, and we've heard it on the news, I'm assuming trustees have gotten emails about OC Transpo, and it is a big issue that, without prompt, has affected a lot of the quality of lives of our students, especially students who do have to access those specialized programs such as ESL, Gifted, and other specialized SHISM programs in their schools. Another interesting thing was, while we do understand there are costs and benefits to each idea, this one was about a universal Presto card program for each, so that each high school student could get a Presto card irregardless of the distance they lived from their high school. We did find some research done by Kingston's 2 coterminous school districts, which actually do have a universal bus pass program that grants each high school student a bus pass irregardless of their location. The report does a really good job at analyzing the costs, the benefits, and the 5-year outcomes that the program has had. We do have 3 copies of the report if any of the trustees would like to read through them. So we'll pass them around this way. And there's another copy in the trustee lounge as well. Another thing that students touched upon was especially going back to the specialized programs where the students are thankful that they're getting the Presto card. That's not the problem that students really highlight. It's more that when the students are granted this Presto card, the bus service to complement the Presto card that they're given is unfortunately not there. And we do understand that OSTA is working very, very well to advocate for students, and we do really want to ensure that, or commend OSTA for this and ensure that they continue on this pathway. One more aside on this topic would be the use of vaporizers, e-cigarettes, as well as other assaults and crimes on public transit. In terms of the safety on public transit, in the recent months, students have felt a little bit more unsafe than they have been in the past. Or perhaps that's just a result of us consulting them. Maybe they just hadn't been listened to before. So again, that's working with our partners at OC Transpo at OSTA to really make sure that students do feel safe when they're on the bus.
So moving into the last of our 3 sections regarding what we are hearing from students, it regards mental health, which, as many of us are aware, is a very, again, big ticket item in today's society. And one thing I do want to start off with is that the board is spending a lot of money on mental health resources, and there are a lot of amazing resources out there. The main issue that was highlighted by students is they didn't know. They didn't know that these resources existed. They didn't know they were offered through the school. They didn't understand the process they had to go through to get them. So when looking at the student recommendations, the first one being that the role and qualifications of guidance counselors are clearly defined at the start of each school year. This is something that we've found has been left up to the discretion of each school. In various schools, we've heard that there has been false advertisement that there is a confidentiality between students and guidance counselors, which many students find out the hard way that that's not true. Looking past that, it's the board make a concerted effort to advertise mental health resources and explore what initiatives and other jurisdictions have undertaken to improve student mental health resources. So this is simply expanding our viewpoint, seeing what worked in other places, seeing what could work here. What we're doing may be great, but can we be doing something better? There's always that next step. And lastly, that teachers continue to receive professional development on student mental health and student well-being training. The highlighting cause of this is when a student has a panic attack in class, for example, depending on what class they're in, they're going to receive a different response from the teacher, be it go take a walk, here let me talk to you and let's talk through this, or be quiet and listen to the lecture. That is unfortunately an experience we hear that varies widely depending on school, class, even period. So that caps it off for the lack of apparent mental health resources in schools.
When we did engage with the feeder schools, we did realize that the needs of the 7/8s and the elementary students are quite different from what the high school capacity is. They have different interests, and they're at a different point in their journey with the OCDSB. And I think really with a lot of these 7/8 kids and elementary kids do have some interesting things to say, and I think, we think as student trustees that the board should continue to expand into some student voice initiatives at the elementary level, because there is a lot of potential there, and the OCDSB could really be a leader in that domain, where we're listening not only to our best and brightest in grades 9 through 12, but we're listening to everyone starting from kindergarten. We could even start with roundtables. Imagine doing a roundtable with kindergartens. You'd hear some amazing things that you just might not ever think of. We do want to acknowledge Alison Fouise and Jose Desjardins, teachers at Bell High School and Broadview Avenue Public School, who were very, very supportive in getting these roundtables with elementary students organized. We really do appreciate that support. It's me again. Okay. Another type of consultation we did was with students who attended the 15th Annual Rainbow Youth Forum. And again, this was another one of those eye-opening opportunities where, as trustees, we heard stuff that we might not normally have heard of if we did not go to this consultation. It was a different perspective that may not be presented in everyday life. On this, we did hear that a lot of the board's initiatives on equity are working quite well. We asked students if they had any anonymous feedback for the organizers of the Rainbow Youth Forum. We said it would be completely anonymous and that it would just be to make sure that next year's event would run smoother. And surprisingly, they had nothing negative to say about the forum, which means good job for staff. They did quite an excellent job there. However, there does continue to be the isolated incidences of bullying, especially surrounding online bullying, especially now that it has gone into the private sphere, where teachers aren't necessarily, or staff and parents and teachers aren't necessarily monitoring what happens online. In terms of the gender-neutral bathrooms, at least at this consultation, again, students were very, very appreciative of the effort that the board has made. However, there still seems to be some stigma, and the bathrooms at times can be uncomfortable for students to attend to use because of that stigma. And we do want to thank Shannon Mills, again, a teacher who was involved with this, for organizing this roundtable. Thank you.
So moving on to one of the other big student forums that our district does every year, the fourth annual Indigenous Youth Symposium. As some of you might be aware, I was actually one of the MCs for the day, and that was my fourth, and unfortunately in the capacity of a student, last Indigenous Youth Symposium. Quite the emotional day on my part. And the big messages that were echoed was between the Indigenous Youth Symposium, between the Original Voices Youth Council, which is carried out by Chris Mawasaki and Josh Lewis, in addition to the symposium for younger grades in February, along with the leadership camp in April. From the ends and the ends and the ends, you understand that there's a lot of things the board is doing, and a lot of things the board is doing right. There are so many Indigenous students that are grateful for this. I know that I met some of my first friends in high school at this symposium, and we stay connected now, even though we don't go to the same school, and there might be now in third-year university. That idea of community is what really came out of this day, and what I think we need to remember as a board. But the consequence of that community was that as amazing as this one day is, it's one day. As amazing as the 5 days of all-day programming for Indigenous students, it's 5 days. What we need to be looking at this is, how can we further that inclusion and sense of community in our schools every day? How can we make it so students feel like they belong and have friends every day, not just looking forward to the event 2 months from now or next semester?
Next, I'll be talking about the Student Senate, a very powerful part of that the board has. It's an asset in increasing student voice at this level. And this year, Ganabot and I have been really pushing student senators to bring the initiatives and bring back what they've learned to their local schools, whether it be through organizing these roundtable discussions that we've attended, organizing town halls, or through other leadership events. In the past, student senators have been sort of a sideshow at student councils, but this year we are really making sure that at the student council level, at the local level, in each one of their schools, that they're empowered with the right skills and tools to run their own events and really bring what they learn at these meetings once per month to their school. So it's not just a one-off, once per month meeting, but now they're bringing it home to their communities, so that like level of engagement can continue. This year, the Senate did vote to pursue a mental health-related initiative for their overarching initiative. We'll be meeting with Dr. Petra Duschner for another consultation on what the board currently does on mental health and what the Student Senate as an organization can do in each one of their schools or at a board level to improve the level of mental health initiatives. Yeah.
So running in tandem with the Student Senate is President's Council. So for everyone to just be on the same page, President's Council is a council made up of the two presidents or incumbents or vice presidents, however each school decides to label it, where they meet once every 5 weeks and they usually decide on an initiative to lead board-wide. This specific group, I've had a very fun and satisfying time engaging with them continuously, because just like the senators, they represent their student body, and they have been involved in student council for many more years than I ever was, so they are able to bring forward opinions and concerns that I never would have thought of. So what they have focused on for the 2019-2020 year has been fronted by the themes of inclusion and accessibility. Similar to the Battle of the Grades, which happens at Earl of March Secondary School, which is a competition of sorts where each grade will be assigned a color and tasks and donations, and eventually one grade will win at the end of the week. I've seen it in person. It is almost scary how involved and excited students get, but they want to apply something larger to every school on the board. So instead of just grade loyalty, it becomes school loyalty and school spirit.
Next, I'll be talking a little bit more about our engagement at the provincial level with the Ontario Student Trustees Association. This really has been one of those eye-opening experiences where we're presented a perspective that we might not necessarily get to experience if we're not in this role. In October 2019, we had the opportunity to attend the fall general meeting of OCDSB, where we did learn more about engaging with students, especially in elementary grades, the students' perspective on e-learning, which Trustee Gagné will be highlighting a bit later, and we heard from experts in the field of education, specifically relating to student engagement, such as Nancy Naylor, the Deputy Minister of Education, surrounding the e-learning mandate of the government, as well as Nora March, who was the former EQAO Chief Executive Officer the former EQAO Chief Executive Officer, who also presented at the forum about changes to the EQA system that are being proposed. Conferences at OCDSB remain a very valuable resource for student trustees, not just to learn about the policy, but also to learn more about our jobs and our roles as student trustees. So let me assure you that the investment in sending student trustees to the conferences is definitely a plus.
So looking at what has been on the forefront of OCDSB for the last year is the e-learning mandate. Persif is going to go around and hand out some of the full-sized reports. In our own report, you can see we've attached the fast facts page. This report was carried out by running a survey with over 6,000 respondents from across Ontario. One of the interesting things that we saw from this encatchment was that it was both high achieving and quote-unquote average students responding, both rural and urban, giving us a very broad sense of how students felt about what at the time was announced as a 4-credit mandatory e-learning thing, I messed up those words, to graduate. So in this report, we can see that only 35.2% of students received or responded that they had difficulty taking the course due to inherent functions of the system. As someone who's taken many e-learning courses, I contribute to this statistic. 60% of students felt that their learning styles were not accommodated. That's over half of students feeling like it's not for them. And if we're only accommodating 40%, then there's a bit of some questions there. I invite you to read the report. It's very interesting. It gives some very unique perspectives that even us as student trustees hadn't quite thought of before. But it really just highlights the importance of how we implement e-learning really will affect students from next year to the next 50.
And if trustees do want a copy and didn't get a chance, or any of the staff, please email both of us, and then we'll make sure that you guys have a copy of the reports that were sent, that are going around the table. Another professional development opportunity that I had the opportunity to attend was the National Child Day at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. And I think the big takeaway here is sometimes as leaders, it's very tempting to just talk, or take control of everything, but sometimes you need to really lay back as leaders in your community and just simply listen to what the people in your community have to say, rather than just doing the whole they say something and then we say something right back to them saying, okay, that's your problem, you can do A, B, C. And instead of that, maybe just for one day, listen for a little bit, take like 2 or 3 hours and just listen to what students have to say. And it was very surprising because a lot of the stuff that they had to say at the National Child Day, they coincided with a lot of the stuff we actually said and had in our report, which we've heard from the roundtable. So especially on mental health, public transportation, and sustainability. These are all key pillars that youth right now, it's their priorities right now, because they're worried about the future of their planets. They're worried about how they're going to function, especially in the mental capacity, when they go on to post-secondary. So I really think that this opportunity was a good one for me to attend.
And just capping it off with PD conferences for the first half of this school year, I attended the People for Education annual conference at York University in Toronto. Throughout the day, it was designed in plenaries and a keynote. We heard from Stephen Lewis on honestly everything surrounding education. It was incredible to listen to, and brought a lot of unique perspectives that I hadn't considered before. And during that day, while I did participate in conversations around e-learning and combating microaggressions in the school environment, something I took away that I invite all of you to think about and think on is the consequences of private money in a public system. This topic was something that loomed over the entire day, and almost everyone had a couple of cents to share on. Just so we're all on the same page, that is, in essence, schools receiving donations that boost their spending above other schools that aren't capable of receiving the same amount of donations due to the geographic area or socioeconomic status of the community around the school. This concept is very intriguing. I don't quite see a clear thesis per se coming out of it, but it is an interesting lens to apply to conversations we're having, especially around finances. And yeah, that caps off that conference.
Every day during our terms as student trustees, we continue to learn something new or something a little bit wacky about the dynamic nature of the OCDSB. You know what? Coming into this role, it's not, this building isn't that bureaucratic building on the side of Greenbank anymore. There's a lot of cool things that are going on here. I'm personally really thankful for the support that Myra Wells in board services, as well as Superintendent Hardy, Trustee Lyra, Vice Principal Gagné, who is in charge of the Student Senate, as well as Nicole Guthrie have provided us during our terms as student trustees. Like, honestly, we simply would not be able to function without these people. In the upcoming months, we look forward to continue to connecting with underrepresented student groups and supporting tangible student initiatives at the grassroots levels. And I don't know, I was just thinking a few days ago, Gannabout and I are different in almost every way. In fact, one of the only similarities we have is that we're both student trustees. And I think that's one of the best things the board could ever have, where we both, on some issues, will both be thinking two different things, and then that just adds a more, like a diverse atmosphere to the thing, so it's not just two carbon copies of the same student trustee saying the same thing twice. And I'm really thankful for the few months that I've had with my co-trustee, the student trustee. Thanks.
And just on my closing words, I remember winning this election last April 31st, or whatever the last day of April is, I don't know. And I remember Samantha and Isaac, the previous student trustees, came up to me and said, "You are in for a wild ride. You have no idea what you're getting into, and you're going to learn more than you ever thought possible." And that was the biggest understatement they ever made to me. I cannot say enough how much of a learning experience these last few months have been. And I'm just going to read from my closing remarks in the report because it's said better than I could probably say it now. But perhaps the most challenging part of this position that I've discovered so far has not been the time commitment nor the desire to remain involved, but instead it has been figuring out how to balance life between school, my employment, and my community involvement. This role, managing my time and prioritizing my health, has been a challenge. I will not lie about that. I would like to specifically extend my thanks to Superintendent Baker, Superintendent Hardy, board services team members, including Myra Wells and Nicole Guthrie, for all of the support that I've received. To echo what Priscilla said, I have no idea how I would have done it without these instrumental and incredible people. And I would like to thank everyone at the table for entertaining my questions and clearing up what a consent and non-consent item is, which I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't quite understand until the last board meeting. But I think that's the process of all of this. It is an incredible experience, and no matter the challenge, I am always reminded that I'm here because I was elected by my peers to be here, and that I have a duty to bring their voices to the table. And perhaps that is the thing I most enjoy about this role, is having the formalized opportunity to funnel voices to a decision-making level and make sure students are heard. And with that, I'll just quote that Kathy Nagon there is actually the student trustee for the Toronto Catholic District School Board. I just like the quote that without students, there is no school board. And I think that really underlines what we do. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you both very much. We do have time for questions, if there are any questions from for the student trustees. Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much for the very, very thorough presentation, and congratulations. You guys are great, and clearly a lot of your peers in the Senate and the President's Council are very active and impactful as well. I would like to recommend within your means that you do follow up as you can collectively with 7/8 and extending into the elementary years. I was really struck a few months ago by the quality of the interventions of a 7/8 student council president who, to be honest, put the parent council to shame in terms of how on point they were and how much they were asking for changes. And so I think that there is capacity at elementary levels, and ideally would be you folks and we would be able to tap into that where it exists. You have a number of recommendations. I guess my question to you is, how would you like to see those best pursued? Will you be pursuing those recommendations yourselves in forthcoming months, perhaps seeking replies to your recommendations from OSTA, from staff, from others? Is this something that you're looking for formal staff replies to, or will you be pursuing in time, or it would be a shame in a sense for your recommendations to sort of be seen perhaps to go nowhere? So I guess what I'm wondering is how you see pursuing those recommendations usefully in the next few months.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to respond to that, when it comes to specific recommendations and implementing them through policy, that is a conversation that we have had since September about various avenues that we have wanted to pursue, and that is a conversation that is still evolving with Superintendent Hardy and Vice Principal Matthew Gagne. I cannot tell you one specific recommendation that we would like to pursue in the coming year. As you can see, those are 9 very big calls that I think we can say we support wholeheartedly, among another 90 big calls that we weren't able to include in this report. But I think the biggest thing including those recommendations in this report is that those topics, I hope, will be on your mind whenever a conversation comes up around those. Very rarely in the real world do we see something have an idea and that idea is directly and literally translated. That's the reality of the world we live in. But what can happen is we can examine issues with that lens. When we are looking at janitorial contracts, it's not just composting and the other recommendations, but it's how does that apply to the broader contract, the broader consensus. I hope that answers your question.
Trustee Fisher?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you for the report tonight. I know I as a trustee, I very rarely have the time to engage directly, but I always listen and very much appreciate your interventions at committee and at board. With respect to the OSTA report on e-learning, can you give me a bit more of a sense of what OSTA's sort of outreach and advocacy strategy is around the report? And in particular, is OSTA looking for boards perhaps to consider writing letters of support for these recommendations? I know obviously it's a very timely issue. I think the data within, particularly the data around how people feel about participating in e-learning classes is obviously very timely. So I'm just curious to know sort of what the expectation is for boards and for trustees to perhaps be weighing in on this in support, through their own advocacy.
Thanks for your question, and through you, Madam Chair. So the first part of OSTA's advocacy plan was really to get the media involved as soon as this report was published. It was featured in CBC as well as the Toronto Star, so that was their first pillar. The next part was really making sure that there was a carry forward between last year's student trustees and this year's student trustees, so it wasn't just lost in the pile of reports that were made. Going into the question on what school boards can do, OSTA is advocating that student trustees really get involved with their boards to make these letters, to make these recommendations, and to really connect with the media, to make that noise that this issue really needs to garner. The Student Trustees Association did do a really good job at making the report, and at this point it is making sure that the findings of these reports aren't buried under the paperwork and are really making the headlines. Thanks for your question.
That's helpful. Maybe we want to consider that as part of our own advocacy and outreach, or even making our own media outlets aware of the reports and giving sort of a local perspective on this issue. I think that's something that we should consider as a board.
And finally, Trustee Penny.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I too sort of skimmed this report, and I do have a question on it, and that is the majority of the recommendations tend to be structural in nature and not so much with regards to the content or with regards to the concept of e-learning. So I'm just wondering if you have any additional comments with regards to those, other than the the comments with regards to the structural comments.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll take this question as your question was actually the main topic of the discussion I focused on at the People for Education conference. And that comes down to the content of online courses, as you're aware, is dictated by the ministry, with the exception of very few courses which are locally designed by teachers and boards. And for the most part, the content in these courses is fine. We don't have a huge issue with the content of the courses. It's more how it's being delivered. The other piece to that is no one is opposed to e-learning. We recognize that merging what classrooms were 100 years ago with the technology we have now will inevitably happen. We're not trying to stand in the way of that. We're just trying to make sure that can happen for every student. As you saw, I believe the figure was 90,000 students would not be able to graduate due to a vast variety of circumstances surrounding broadband internet, access to computers, and access to computers. So when it comes to that question, the content is fine, but it's a secondary step. First, we want to make sure everyone can access it and actually get online, recognizing that e-learning, especially blended learning between both physical and online, does have very good success rates and does serve students very well when it works. So to answer those questions, it's not the first priority at this point.
Thank you very much for being so good at answering our questions and for an excellent report this evening. I would like now to call on Vice Chair Penny for the report from Board in Camera.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Board met in camera this evening and reports and recommends as follows. Number 1, on a personnel matter, moved by Trustee Schwartz, which I will second, that staff proceed as directed in Board in camera with respect to the director evaluation. And number 2?
Let's deal with number 1 first.
All right.
So we have held our debate and deliberations in camera. I will call the question then on the recommendation on a recorded vote. All those in favor?
Trustee Blackburn? Trustee Campbell? Trustee Ellis? Trustee Jenikins? Trustee Penny? Trustee Evans? Trustee Lyra? Trustee Bronovan? Trustee Fisher? Trustee Schwartz? Trustee Scott?
And those opposed, I believe that was carried unanimously. Trustee Penny, are there other recommendations?
There are, Madam Chair, with regards to the approval of the evaluation of the Regional Internal Audit Team performance, moved by Trustee Schwartz, which I will second, that the evaluation of the Regional Internal Audit Team performance be approved as directed in Board in camera.
And again, our deliberations were held in camera, and I will call the question then on this recommendation. All those in favor on a recorded vote.
Trustee Blackburn? Trustee Campbell? Trustee Ellis? Trustee Jenikins? Trustee Penny? Trustee Lyra? Trustee Bronovan? Trustee Fisher? Trustee Schwartz? Trustee Scott?
And opposed, and that is also carried unanimously. Is there anything further, Trustee Penny?
Nothing further, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Now we come to the briefing from the Chair of the Board, and I do have 3 items this evening. First, by way of a labor update, last Friday the OSSTF announced that it will hold another full-day withdrawal of service at select school boards. The school boards where this will happen do not include the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. All of our Ottawa-Carleton District School Board schools will be open tomorrow. Secondly, the OCDSB is working with Canada Homestay Network to arrange and support hosts for our international student. We are currently looking for families in our community who would be willing to host a student, and information can be found on the OCDSB website. And finally, beginning in January, schools across the district will be hosting kindergarten registration information sessions for the 2020-2021 school year. Dates and times will be posted in front of local schools and on the websites for each school. So I hope lots of interested parents will take the opportunity to come out and find out about our kindergarten programs in their local schools. And that is all my briefing for tonight. If there are any questions. And if there are no questions, I will move on to ask the director for her briefing.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. My first comment is regarding Relay for Life. In 2019, secondary students organized 14 events to support the Canadian Cancer Society Relay for Life. I'm proud to announce that together they have raised more than $650,000 for cancer research. The funds will help to support research on all cancers, advocate to make healthy living easier, and to provide essential support services for people living with cancer and their families. Congratulations to the students at AY Jackson, Bell, Corrine Wilson, Colonel Bai, Gloucester, John McCrae, Lisgar, Longfields, Davison Heights, Maryvale, Nepean, Osgood Township, SRB, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and Woodruff. Holiday closures, a reminder that students will finish classes at the end of the day on Friday, December the 20th, and will return to school on Monday, January the 6th, 2020. Administration offices will also be closed from December 25th and reopen on January the 2nd, 2020. We hope all will enjoy a safe, happy, and restful holiday break, and we wish you all the very best for 2020 in the new year.
Are there any questions for the director? If there are none, we can move on then with our agenda. This evening we have no delegations, so that brings us to item 10.1, confirmation of the board minutes from the 26th of November 2019. Would somebody like to move confirmation? Trustee Lyra? Seconded by Trustee Schwartz. Are there any errors or omissions? I don't see anybody else's hand up, but I do have one note on page 41 of your package, which is page 5 of the minutes, item 10.3. The recommendation that is here, I think we need to modify what this is, because it was approved by consent, but it was actually the amended version of the policy that was attached to the agenda, and it was not approved in principle. As I understood it, it was approved. So I will ask if board services could revisit how that has been expressed to make sure that the record is correct in terms of what we actually did approve on the evening of the 26th. And if there's nothing else, then I will call the question on the minutes as potentially amended. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Which brings us to the minutes from the 2nd of December 2019 board organizational meeting. Somebody like to move those? Trustee Schwartz, seconded by Trustee Bronovan. Are there any errors or omissions in this one? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of confirming these minutes? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Is there any business arising from either of these sets of minutes? Yes, there is, and that is that we do have a notice of motion to amend a previous motion to appoint a member to the Special Education Advisory Committee by trustee Ellis, which is in your package at page 95. And I will turn to trustee Ellis.
Thank you. This is just to rectify a misunderstanding in communications and a decision where we appointed Catherine Kesu as the primary for Autism Canada. And the intention from that organization was that she be the alternate representative. So I hope you'll support this motion and we can give them the appropriate position that they're expecting. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Ellis. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Trustee Fisher, is there any discussion on the recommendation? In that case, any wrap-up, trustee Ellis?
None needed. Thank you.
So I will call the question on a recorded vote, please. All those in favor of the recommendation that Catherine Casu be appointed as the alternate member for Autism Ontario?
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jennekins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Fisher, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And opposed? None opposed. The motion is carried. Is there any other business arising? If there is none, next we have receipt of the Committee of the Whole Budget Report from the 26th of November 2019. Trustee Penny, would you like to move receipt?
I'd like to move receipt of the Committee of the Whole Budget Report, Madam Chair.
And do we have a seconder for receipt? Trustee Lyra, are there any errors or omissions in the Budget Committee report? If there are none, I'll call the question then on receipt. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. And I understand there were no recommendations. Thank you very much. Next we have Committee of the Whole report from the 10th of December 2019. Trustee Penny.
I'd like to move receipt of the report, Madam Chair.
And is there a seconder? Trustee Blackburn, are you seconding? All those, or are there any errors or omissions? Trustee Blackburn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You'll note on page 125, the wrong person is indicated as chairing that meeting.
Sorry, where on page 125? Oh, indeed you are correct. Thank you very much for noticing that. Are there any other errors or omissions? If there are none, I will call the question on receipt as amended. All those in favor? Oh. Do we have another error or omission here?
This is on page 1115, item 6 on matters for action regarding the student trustee policy. It just says that Trustee Lyra Evans noted that the student trustees have lobbied for the proposed changes. However, the changes to the policy haven't been as a result of our lobbying. Instead, it's just a result of the provincial government's legislation change on the election of student trustees.
That's fine, but that doesn't alter the minutes. Student trustees have lobbied for these changes, for the change in terms of the 2-year term. So that is, from that point of view, it is correct. It may not have been this year that they lobbied, but student trustees have lobbied for them. So I will ask staff to take that one under advisement, but I think there's not actually a correction required for that one. So coming back to call the question on these minutes, all those in favor of confirming as amended? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Moving on then, recommendations, sorry. Trustee Penny.
There are 3 recommendations in the minutes, Madam Chair. And did you want me to read them out? Or, okay.
Yes, please.
Moved by Trustee Evans, and which I will second, that the proposed changes to policy P.107.gov student trustees attached as Appendix A to report 19-118 be approved.
And I'm just finding the page that's on
page 118.
118.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's on
116.
116. Page 116 in the package and page 4 of the report. Is that a consent item? I'm seeing no objections, so we will just hold that one for a moment and find out about the other recommendations.
Second recommendation, moved by Trustee Blackburn, which I will second. And this is a lengthy one. That the Chapman Mills Public School JK Grade 6 attendance boundary area be redirected to Longfields Davidson Heights Secondary School for grades 7 to 12 on a phased basis, commencing with grades 7 and 9 in September 2020, followed by grades 7, 8, and 9 and 10 in 2021 until full phase-in of grades 7 to 12 enrollment by 2023, subject to recommendations B and C to report 19-125. Part B, that the current 2019-2020 graduating Chapman Mills area public school area grade 6 students be provided with a one-time option to attend Cedarview Middle School for September 2020, followed by grades 9 to 12 at Longfields Davidson Heights Secondary School, and further subject to the sibling provisions outlined in recommendations C to report 19-125. Part C, that the current 2019-2020 Chapman Mills Public School area grade 6 students attending Chapman Mills Public School and Chapman Mills Public School area grades 7-8 students attending Cedarview Middle School may attend John McCrae Secondary School for grades 9 to 12 if they have an older sibling currently attending John McCrae Secondary School in grades 9 to 11. And Part D, that the intermediate and secondary school attendance boundary for Chapman Mills Public School area be approved as outlined in Appendix C to report 19-125.
Thank you, Trustee Penny. Is this a consent item? And I'm seeing no objection to this one. And finally, we have one more recommendation, I believe.
We do, Madam Chair, and that is moved, a motion by Trustee Schwartz, I will second, that the date for the presentation of the final Rideau-Gloucester Transition Monitoring Report be delayed until the fall of 2020 so that the current year EQAO data can be included in the final analysis, and that staff hold a meeting with the school council at Gloucester High School to discuss the feasibility, usefulness, and relevance of the original report elements to be included in the final report.
Thank you, Trustee Penny. Is this a consent item? And are separate votes required on any of these? So if not, I will call the question then on all 3 of these recommendations at once. On a recorded vote, all those in favor.
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jennekins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Fisher, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And opposed? None opposed, so those 3 recommendations are carried unanimously. And we have no non-consent items, which brings us to item 10.6, report 19-131, trustee resignation and appointment process, zone 10. Madam Director.
Thank you, to you, Madam Chair. I will introduce the report and ask Executive Officer Giroux to help us through the report and the attached policy and to entertain questions from trustees. So the report is located on page 133 of your package, and the purpose of the report is to seek approval to accept the resignation of Trustee Erica Bronovan and to seek approval for the candidate selection process per the policy that is attached. We did receive Trustee Bronovan's notice on December the 4th, and a copy is in fact attached to this package. We have also attached to the package policy P050 gov rather, that outlines the process that has in fact been used by our board in such circumstances, and that will take us through a proposed process for the approval. Once approval has been given, if it is so given this evening, that will give us the pathway to get started on that process to fill this vacancy. I'll turn it over to Executive Officer Giroux, who has some additional comments in terms of research and historical background and some recommendations for steps forward.
Thank you. The report before you is on folio 133, and so as you're aware, under the Education Act, the board has 90 days to appoint a new trustee to the office. This board has a policy that states that where there's a vacancy, we fill by appointment, not by election. We've been through the appointment process on 4 previous occasions, and we have outlined that process in this report and would like tonight to make sure that you're familiar with the process, and if you have any questions or proposed revisions to that process, that we'd clarify those this evening so that we're clear on the process as we go forward. In order for an individual to be qualified to be an applicant, as you know, it follows the elections legislation. So the requirements are that you be a Canadian citizen, at least 18 years of age, a public school elector, and a resident of the City of Ottawa. It is not necessary that the applicants reside in the specific electoral zone. We do have a process for confirming qualification. Candidates are required to submit a letter of application, but they also have to complete a declaration of qualification, and we follow up with the city in terms of verifying their qualifications. We will reach out to those individuals who ran in the most recent municipal election. And there are some issues to confirm in terms of timelines. We had proposed scheduling of the interviews, committee of the whole, a special meeting on February the 11th, subject to the number of applicants. But it's probably preferable that we just proceed with February 11th as the fixed date, because we do need to let individuals know in advance what the date is. And so rather than having an either-or scenario, go with that one date. The other question that you'll want to consider is whether or not you want to have a special board meeting at the end of that evening, or whether you want to do the appointments formally at the board meeting on February 25th. There are pros and cons to both of those. If you proceed immediately at the end of the interviews and you make a decision, and then you do the swearing in, then the work is all done and the individual is able to start immediately. However, given that you don't know who the outcome is, the individual has not yet had a chance to review the oath of office, does not necessarily have family in attendance, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some protocol issues that are normally associated with a swearing-in ceremony that are not as available to the successful candidate. As I mentioned, pros and cons to either way. That's a decision that we can work through this evening. In terms of what the written application looks like, A copy of it is attached, and we ask the applicants to describe what their qualifications are. I believe it's a 500-word submission. We've got a contact form. We do ask them for their contact information, and we do post that information publicly, so as you would in a municipal election, so that anybody who wants to ask questions of the potential candidates is able to do that. There are some frequently asked questions included in the package, and in terms of the process for the meeting itself, excuse me, there are guidelines on page 155 in your package, Appendix G. So we do a draw to determine the order of the interviews. The candidates are given 5 minutes to make a presentation. We do ask everybody to arrive 30 minutes in advance so that we know the people are here. We ask them to refrain from using electronic devices so that they can't be watching the interviews of the other candidates. They're not permitted in the boardroom during the meeting until their interview. Afterwards, they may stay. And they can use electronic media for their presentation. And so they make a 5-minute presentation, and the committee has a maximum of 10 minutes to ask questions of the candidate. And so there's a rotational process that's outlined at the bottom of folio 155 that you'll want to make sure that you're comfortable with. And to the extent possible, try to keep the questions and answers as tight as possible so that there's maximum opportunity there. Once all of the candidates have been interviewed, then there's a brief recess where there's an opportunity for the room to clear, and then we come back and there's a vote by secret ballot. And you're, I think, fairly familiar with the rules in terms of our balloting. So I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions on either the process for running the advertisement and the guidelines for applicants or for the conduct of the meeting.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify a little bit about process at this point, we are in board, which means that under the board rules, no one may speak more than once to the motion, unless we get into amendments, in which case, again, it's once to the amendments. Trustees who have submitted letters of resignation under the Education Act are not permitted to vote on the recommendation to accept their resignations. However, I believe that trustees who are resigning, who are not resigning as of the instant, are still entitled to vote on other aspects, such as the part of the motion related to the replacement process. So just wanted that to be clear to start with. And the floor is open, but remembering that people can only, at this point, speak once. And I'll start with Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move the recommendation on folio 135.
And would you like any introduction?
Very briefly, Madam Chair, it is with a heavy heart that I move this motion tonight. Eric has been a great friend to the board, to people around the table, to staff, to the residents she serves, and it's with sadness that we'll see her go. She has been an incredible, strong voice around this table for kids. While we've not always agreed on recommendations in front of us and have had lively debates, it was always respectful, it was always honest, and that will be hard to replace. So I just, and I will ask that we perhaps look at voting at A and voting B separately. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the recommendation? Trustee Lyra will second, and I have you next on my list.
I'd like to make a motion that we move into Committee of the Whole, our rules of Committee of the Whole.
Do we have a seconder to adopt rules of committee? I'm not seeing a seconder, so that will fail for want of a seconder. Please go ahead.
Okay, I have a list of questions. My first question is, it says that a list of qualified candidates will be provided to trustees. Is that qualified as in everyone who meets the legal requirement, or will board services go through and say this person is not qualified enough by whatever metric might be used?
The only qualifications are the legal requirements. We don't comment on the candidacy of the individual.
Okay. I think that February 11th makes sense if we want to have our new trustee colleague fully participating in discussion in the for the board meeting of February. So I'm going to move an amendment, because I don't think it's in there, move an amendment that we have our swearing-in ceremony on the 11th.
So we would be clarifying that the interviews and the swearing-in would happen on February the 11th.
If this amendment is accepted, do we have a seconder for the amendment to hold both the interviews and the and a special board for swearing in on the 11th? We don't seem to have a seconder for that amendment, so.
Madam Chair, we do need to clarify the date for the interviews, because we have 2 dates in the report. So just to make that clear, from a staff perspective, we recommend the 11th of February for a couple of reasons. One, you may require a special night. 2, I will disclose that I will not be in attendance at the February 18th board meeting. And I'm sure you can ably be represented by the board services team, but we don't have anyone else on the team who has been through the process.
So the motion to do both the interviews and the swearing in on the 11th fails for want of a seconder, but that doesn't mean that a motion to do one of those things couldn't pass. So Trustee Lara, you still have the floor.
Okay. I have a question about the recess between the end of the interviews and the voting or the election that happens at the board. How much time are we allowed to discuss amongst ourselves? Can you give us a little bit more information about what that recess can look like?
If you just allow me a minute, I was wondering about that same question as I was reading through. It's not intended that the recess is an opportunity to have a meeting separate from the vote, but it's also not, there's no restriction that trustees can't have any dialogue. And certainly as we go forward, I can clarify that in terms of our past practice, what the length of time was and what the boundaries are. But either way, it's important that there is just a bit of recess so that we know we've reached the end of the interviews and people are clear on the names going forward, et cetera.
Okay, I'd like to move an amendment that we hold the interviews on February 11th.
Thank you, Trustee Lara. Do we have a seconder for the, to specify the 11th? Trustee Blackburn will second. Any further introduction?
We have to pick a day. I think the 11th sounds great.
Is this amendment friendly by any chance? And I'm seeing no objections, so that amendment is friendly. Anything further, Trustee Lara?
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment that we hold the swearing in on the 11th.
So do we have a seconder for that? Trustee Ellis will second that. Is that one friendly? And I'm seeing it's not. So we are debating the amendment Just give me half a second to make a note here of where we are. So your introduction then on the amendment, and on the amendment, we have a speaking time limit of 3 minutes for an individual, and again, it's only speaking once to the amendment. So Trustee Lyra, introduce your amendment.
So, like I said, holding it on the 11th will give the opportunity for our new trustee to be able to participate in inboarding camera on the 18th. They will get all of their package materials in advance. I think it is beholden on us to give access to the new trustee to represent their constituents as soon as possible. I think if the person suspects that they're likely to win, they are welcome to bring their family to the potential the board meeting for the swearing in on the 11th. But I really do believe that it is important to have a community represented as early as possible, as quickly as possible. And so I see no good reason, and I'm open to be convinced otherwise, that we hold it on the 18th. Thank you.
And on the amendment, Trustee Blackburn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting this. I think that we should do the swearing in on a different day. I appreciate Trustee Lyra's comments, but in my experience, becoming a trustee is a big deal. It is ideal if the person would like their family. There are a couple people at this table who have participated in this process, and if my memory serves me correctly, the decision was made after 11. So if people have young children, I don't think it's appropriate that we would want them sitting here until past 11. We could have 4, 5, 6. We had, I think, 11 people apply. It's a long night for those people. So I think, and I do appreciate we would want the person to get up and going, but I think missing an in-camera meeting is, in the big scheme of life, not that big a deal.
I have Trustee Penny next, and then Trustee Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think as well that it's too soon, even though the interviews and the questions will be going on that evening. I think that if it's premature to schedule the swearing in for that, considering that there might be a fair amount of candidates to interview, and if it runs over, and then the expectations of the candidates are going to be, what's going to happen and stuff like this. I think it's prudent to maybe take a week, and I don't think a week is a huge loss to the community. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Trustee Fisher on the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just to add my perspective, as the trustee has actually gone through an appointment process twice as a candidate. I think it's good to put some distance between the actual interviews and the swearing-in ceremony. We don't know how many candidates we'll get, and if I recall the process that Don and I both went through for the second time, or at least my second time, there were a number of candidates, and it did take a long time. So I think we should create some space between the interview and the swearing-in ceremony.
And I have no further speakers on the amendment. Wrap up, Trustee Lyra?
None required.
So I will call the question then on the amendment. All those in favor? And opposed? And the amendment fails. I believe you still have some of your 5 minutes left, Trustee Lyra.
I think I'm done. Thank you.
Next speaker on my list is Trustee Blackburn on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So question to staff, would the 18th be the next opportunity to swear the person in?
You could have a special meeting on the 18th. You've got a regularly scheduled committee of the whole, so you could add a special board for the purpose of swearing in the person. You could do that in a couple of ways. You could do it prior to the committee of the whole meeting, and so that the individual could join the committee of the whole meeting, or you could do it following the committee of the whole meeting. Either one of those could work.
So, Madam Chair, would it be appropriate that we put that in writing, just like that we're going to have the when we're going to have the interview?
So if you would like to make an amendment to add 18th of December and specify whether or not it would be a special board meeting, well, it would have to be a special board meeting.
That's what I'd like to do then.
And do we have a seconder for that amendment? Trustee Jenikins will second that. Any further introduction?
None required, Madam Chair.
And in terms of your language, did you intend to include reference to prior to the committee of the whole in camera? Or not?
I'd like a staff comment on that, because we wouldn't be able to get them the documentation prior to the meeting for them to participate, right?
Certainly you could for the public meeting, but not for the in-camera meeting. And what you might, if the purpose of the delay between the decision and the swearing in is in part to allow them time to prepare for the meeting and to have their family able to attend, then you might want to schedule that to happen between the in-camera meeting and the public meeting. And then it'd be a fixed time. You would know what time the family was to be there for, and then the individual could continue in the public meeting, and we'd move to the next committee of the whole meeting or prior to board on the 25th.
Okay, so then before the public committee of the whole meeting.
So let's just get the wording up on the board. And is this, by any chance, a friendly amendment? And I'm seeing no objection. Thank you. So, Trustee Blackburn, anything further?
No, Madam Chair.
Trustee Campbell, on the main motion as amended.
Thank you very much. Favor the process, and I appreciate the discussion and amendments. I do have a question through you for staff on folio 156, with respect to the guidelines for the meeting. I'd just like to understand the nature of, better than I do, the nature of the questions that can be posed to the candidates. Our current process leaves us open to potentially let's say, extremely idiosyncratic questions, potentially from trustees, and not necessarily agreed standardized questions. So I do note that in para 3, it refers to the purpose of the question period being to seek clarification of the candidate's application and experience, and his or her understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the trustee. So should I assume, reading that, and this is, I guess, an agreed, previously agreed process, that any questions on application and experience questions of clarification on application and experience would not be able to stray beyond what the candidate had put in their application form, or do I have that incorrect? And then as to the second part, understanding of the roles and responsibilities of a trustee, that might be more open-ended in terms of not necessarily being bound by what they put on the application form. So do I have that correct, or I just like maybe a comment? I'm trying to scope what kinds of questions are seen as appropriate.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe that there was a fair amount of leeway on the part of trustees in terms of questions about the application if there was something there of interest. Remember that because of the rotation, not every trustee gets to ask a question every time. But one thing that did seem to happen as we worked through the processes in the past is that some trustees always asked the same question. And so we did see sort of candidates being asked similar questions over the course of the evening, but they weren't always the exact same question. So there's some leeway there. We definitely can pull from the last time if you're interested to see the types of questions asked.
Thank you, but just to follow up then, there is in fact no restriction on whatever question anybody actually does want to ask for a particular candidate.
My recollection of the questions that were asked, some were very specific about the candidates' content, but some questions were more focused on issues such as, you know, what might you do to promote equity and inclusion in the district, or what is your strategy about parental engagement, or how would you go about working with community representatives? Those were the...
Okay, thank you.
And I have no other speakers on my, oh, Trustee Penny, did you wish to be on the list?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Trustee Penny then.
No, I just wanted to also very, very quickly reflect my feelings as Trustee Schwartz's kind words that just express my, you know, my personal regret that Trustee Bronwyn's voice will not be at this table in the future, and that, you know, I feel her constituents were extremely well served by her, and you know, I think we'll all miss her her very common sense approach to things, and wish her very luck in the future, Madam Chair.
And that does bring me to the end of my list. So we have a recommendation. We have made a couple of amendments to be more specific in terms of the plan referenced in Part B of the recommendation. We have a request for separate votes on Part A and on Part B. These will be recorded votes. So first of all, on Part A, that the board accept with regret and appreciation for her years of dedicated service the resignation of Erica Bronwyn, Trustee Zone 10, Somerset Kitchissippi, effective 31 December 2019. All those in favor?
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jennings, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Fisher, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And that is carried unanimously. And now for Part B of the recommendation, all those in favor?
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jennings, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronwyn, Trustee Fisher, and Trustee Schwartz, and Trustee Scott.
And opposed? And that motion is carried unanimously. And I think all of us are very sorry to be approving this recommendation tonight, but we are very happy that we do still have a working Trustee Bronwyn for the rest of the month at least. And to that end, we would like to make a very small presentation. We will have our main presentation in January, but I will ask Trustee Penny to do the honors tonight. Thank you, Trustee Penny. And moving on then with our agenda, we still have item 10.7, Memorandum 19-151, revisions to draft policy P.141.gov, Integrity Commissioner. Madam Director, and we're at folio 159 in our package.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. This memorandum is intended to provide trustees with information in regards to the revisions made to the draft policy. We do have Executive Officer Giroux, who has worked with the committee around this document, and happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions on this? I guess I have one big question, and that is, since we did not approve this when we were dealing with it at board, or in committee of the whole rather, are we able to deal with approval of this policy this evening, or will it have to come back to us again in January?
I believe you are in a position to approve it this evening, Madam Chair. And I would like to offer a potential clarification, which will require an amendment to the language in the draft, and I'm sorry for this. We worked on the language based on the discussions we had with members at the meeting and some clarifications afterwards. One of those clarifications was the definition of board member and the definition of trustee. And in the draft language that we provided to you in section 3.5, in the second line it says board members, but I believe in that particular case, given the difference in the definitions, it should be trustees in that section because it includes student trustees, and 3.5I is the student trustee attendance piece. So that's just one clarification, and I'm sorry we didn't catch that coming into the meeting.
Thank you for that, Ms. Giroux. So that means then that since this is not coming to us from committee, any member could potentially move a recommendation to approve this policy. Trustee Blackburn, are you doing that?
I would be happy to do that, Madam Chair.
And do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Trustee Schwartz will second that. So going to Trustee Blackburn for any introduction.
I'd like to thank staff once again for addressing trustee concerns. And I do have one question, is that when would we strike the committee to actually choose the commissioner?
So the next step in the process will be preparing the posting, and we'll have to put together the posting and the term, so we'll work with the purchasing department on that. I suspect that I'm going to say before the end of January we could have that ready to post, and so we wouldn't need the committee to meet in terms of selection until we probably have at least a 3-week window there for posting. There may be some purchasing standards.
Thank you for that, and I'd just like again to thank staff and all the members of the committee who worked on this.
Other speakers on the recommendation? Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I know what we're dealing with the staff, the version of the policy which is with the staff recommended changes, or we're dealing with what came from committee of the whole originally?
We are dealing with what begins on page 161 of your package this evening.
Okay. With the suggested amendments worked in. Okay, great. Okay.
And including the 1 to 3.5, changing board members in the second line to
good.
Trustees, which Ms. Giroux just highlighted.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. One is, I note on the recommended deleted 3.6, it says does not have the jurisdiction to investigate and make inquiries with respect to. The 3.1 is left standing, which I'm sure is correct. May investigate or shall in fact investigate under the terms of the board member code of conduct. But it doesn't suggest make inquiries with respect to. So that's missing in 3.1. I wonder if that's important, or maybe it's not important. And so that's, I guess, my first question.
I believe that we felt that it would be covered in 3.4. I'm just mapping back. The authority is still there. The difference in 3.6 was the request to make the language permissive as opposed to prohibitive.
And I appreciate that. I'm just wondering about the potential loss of or make inquiries, but maybe that's not important. Okay. And with the suggested 3.5, and by the way, very much appreciate all the staff work on this. I know it was very confused at times, and my interventions may have been confused. But under the 3.5, do I have it right that the Integrity Commissioner may provide information, briefings, training to board members with respect to the proposed list of legislation in a non-limited fashion? Could be other legislation or what have you, but that advice would have to be integrity related, or could it be in any respect to any legislation? Because there doesn't seem to be a scoping in 3.5, or is that understood?
I think that if we think about it in the context of the purpose of the policy and also in the context of the role description and the contract for services, that would be covered. So presumably if we take, for example, matters relating to the criminal code, it would only be in the context of governance and integrity issues. It would have nothing to do with breaches of the criminal code that are outside of the jurisdiction of the office.
So that's naturally understood then, and we don't need to alter that. And my remaining question is, there may be no power to produce, but does the Integrity Commissioner have the power to request production of documents? And if not, then that's fine, and if so, should that be here, because I didn't see it?
I'm thinking as I speak, not very well. I believe that in the Code of Conduct itself, it speaks to the process for investigation and what is required in terms of an investigation. I also believe that in the course of our conversations, there was some language at one time about the Integrities Commissioner having power in some ways, and I think we removed the language because they didn't necessarily have the power to compel the production of documentary evidence. They certainly could request, but there isn't necessarily, they're not, they're not in a court proceeding kind of way. They're not legal counsel to the committee. There isn't that legal structure. But they could certainly request as part of their investigation, and they could comment on it if it was not provided.
I appreciate that. So that would be with respect to, I guess, trustees or third parties, and presumably, I guess, we can assume the cooperation of staff if staff documents or internal documents were required. But apart from that, they don't have powers, and that's fine. Okay, I'm cool with this. Thank you.
Trustee Fisher.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and sorry to sort of be late to sort of bringing this thought to the table, but perhaps Michelle can sort of help me think through this. But when I think of the definitions around board members and trustees, and the trustees definition includes student trustees, the challenge that I have in terms of using some of that terminology interchangeably, in my view, is that the duty of care, the fiduciary responsibility is fundamentally different from where I sit as a trustee, because I have a vote, I have to make a decision, versus a student trustee who has responsibilities, who's at the table, is able to provide guidance and an opinion, but ultimately is not, does not have the same level of duty of care or responsibility because they don't have that decision-making power, they don't have that vote. And so when I look at the Integrity Commissioner, I just want to make sure that those distinctions are being thought about as much as possible, because I sometimes feel like we use board members and trustees kind of interchangeably when it comes to this kind of oversight, and I do think that there is a line, and I just want to make sure that we have those definitional issues sort of understood, because I do feel like we use them interchangeably, and I just feel like our duty of care is very different than the student trustee's duty of care.
So it's a good question, and I think in the context of this policy, we did review the definitions with legal counsel, and we did get support for them. But I think there is room for us to continue to reflect on this in some of our other work. And I'm guided a little bit by the language in the Education Act, and at a loss because I don't have it in front of me. But if I'm not mistaken, the language in the Education Act is to the effect of student trustee has all the powers of a board member except they can't vote. And so we'd have to think about it in that context. And this is probably the only case I can think of where we have defined trustee to include student trustee as opposed to using trustee and student trustee in the language. And that's an area where I think we'll continue to give some thought as we move forward. And if it needs further clarification, we can always come back to that.
I appreciate that, and the Education Act is what it is. I don't like it. I think if you were to ask any governance body, public sector or private sector, they would say that that language in that act is not well written or defined. And I think at the end of the day, administratively, if our decisions are ever taken to court, the court is going to look at the things that we did as decision makers around this table. They're not going to look at what student trustees did. So I think there is a different standard of care and responsibility when it comes to our rules, regardless of what the Education Act says. I just don't think it doesn't really reflect, I think, how governance works, you know, in the public sector, private sector context.
I have no other speakers on this, and if there are no other speakers, I will ask Trustee Penny, please, to take the chair for a moment.
Okay, Madam Chair. Oh, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly will be supporting the recommendation, and I very much appreciate the work that staff have done on this. However, the distinction between trustee and board member is one that it becomes sometimes very challenging to find all of the little exceptions, and certainly board member does have a defined legal meaning, whereas the word trustee really does not, and so that's why we can use it to include the student trustees with board members. However, in section 3.7, we speak to a selection committee of trustees appointed by the Board of Trustees. And I don't believe that our intention is to include student trustees as potential selection committee members. I would like to move to replace the word trustees with the words board members in section 3.7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the wording on the screen reflect your true amendment?
It's correct, but I don't have a secondary.
Do we have a second? Trustee Blackburn, do you second? Do you require introduction, Madam Chair? Or Trustee Scott?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I hope that trustees will see it as friendly, but that's yet to be determined.
Thank you very much. And is this a consent item? No, it's not. So we'll start debate, starting with Trustee Lara.
So we
as an organization, talk a great deal about empowering young people and about youth voice. And I see no strong reason that we should not include a potential, it doesn't have to be guaranteed, but a potential for student trustees to be included in the selection of the Integrity Commissioner. I think that we as a board could do well to listen to our student trustees a little bit more, and by giving them a voice in who the Integrity Commissioner is, who they will then also be accountable to, is going to further our goals of empowering young people. As this stands, I will not be supporting it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Trustee Campbell.
I appreciate Trustee Lyra's argument, and it does give me pause. If the student trustees are subject to the code of conduct and will be dealing with potentially entangled with the Integrity Commissioner one way or another, receiving support or subject to investigation, I believe that's the case. Yes, everything applies equally to the student trustees. I do wonder whether we may not choose to appoint a student trustee, but maybe it's something we should keep open as an idea. The selection committee, yes, it makes a decision, but really it's making a recommendation, right? It's making a recommendation to the board. And the board, composed of board members, voting board members, makes the decision at the end of the day. And the selection committee makes a recommendation. So I have to think this through, but I'm not averse to the opposing position on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question of clarification from staff in terms of the intent of the original language in 3.7 with a selection committee of trustees. Was it in fact deliberate that trustees was all-encompassing, or was it an oversight with not having it as board members where it was changed elsewhere in the policy?
I noticed that the language that's in the draft policy, trustees, is not capitalized, so I think that it's part of the original language before we clarified the definition.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions, we're going back to Trustee Scott for a wrap-up on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My rationale here is quite simply that when we receive applications, even from potential contractors or consultants, particularly for a position like this, it often does include personal information that would not normally be something that is allowed under the Education Act to be discussed by the student trustees, and therefore, simply for that reason, I think that it would be inappropriate to have student trustees serving on this particular selection committee. I have no objection to taking their interests into consideration, but I do not think that they could be privy to that kind of confidential information about a potential applicant for the consulting contract.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think we are at board right now. So is it a recorded vote for this amendment, Trustee Scott?
It doesn't have to be a recorded vote, but it does need to be a vote.
Right. Okay. So I'm calling the question on the amendment that in section 3.7 that the word trustees be replaced with board members. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So that, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. That carries 5 votes. And back to you, Trustee Scott.
Well, you can't give up the chair quite yet, Trustee Penny, because I have a second amendment, and that is in section 3.12 on page 163. I would like to move to delete the words "of trustees" at the end of the clause because it's redundant. We're talking about to the board. Everywhere else, it should be just to the board here.
All right, so does the words on the screen reflect your true amendment, Trustee Scott?
Yes.
Would you like introduction?
I don't like redundancies, that's all.
Thank you very much. And is this a consent item?
We need a seconder.
Oh, sorry. Seconded by Trustee Schwartz. Is this a consent item? And it's a consent item, so do we need a vote if it's a board? I guess we might have to, right? Is it friendly? Okay. Now back to you, Trustee Scott.
Thank you very much, Trustee Penny, and that was all the amendments that I had this evening. So, given that I didn't have anybody else on my speakers list for this, let's have the recommendation back up on the screen, if we can find it. There we go. That the draft policy P.141.gov Integrity Commissioner, attached as Appendix A to Report 19-115, be approved as amended. Is there any wrap-up from Trustee Blackburn?
None required, Madam Chair.
So I will call the question then, and this is a recorded vote. All those in favor?
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jennekins. I didn't record you. I didn't record you as being in favor. Trustee Penny, Trustee Evans, Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Fisher, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And opposed?
Trustee Ellis.
And abstentions? So the motion is carried, and that would be 9 in favor and 1 opposed and no abstentions. So thank you very much to staff for getting this revision to us now. I guess this means that we'll be able to proceed. Moving on then to the next item on our agenda, appointment of association representatives to the Special Education Advisory Committee. Madam Director.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. This report is coming forward is seeking to the appointment of a primary and an alternative representative to OCASC, or from OCASC, sorry, to SEAC. We do have a report before you seeking that direction, and Executive Officer Giroux can assist us with questions pertaining to that item.
Ms. Giroux?
I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know that there's anything else to say. The two recommended individuals are Safina Douchy as the primary member and Michelle Berry as the alternate member for OCASC reps on CA.
Thank you. Trustee Lyra?
I will move the recommendation on folio 166 that we appoint the aforementioned people to the Special Education Committee until November 14th, 2022.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. Do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Trustee Ellis will second. Is there any discussion on the recommendation? If not, I'll call the question on a recorded vote. All those in favor?
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jennekins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Fisher, Trustee Schwartz, and Trustee Scott.
And that is carried unanimously. Do we have a report from our OPSPA representatives this evening? Trustee Penny.
None this evening, Madam Chair.
Are there any matters for information? No, we don't have any in our agenda. New business, information and inquiries. Trustee Fisher?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I don't know if board colleagues or staff noticed or caught wind of this, but when the mandate letters were released this week for various federal ministers, the infrastructure minister has been tasked with working with provinces and school boards, provinces, territories, and school boards to assist with the procurement of zero-emission buses. So that's something that we might want to keep top of mind and maybe bring to the attention of OSTA, you know, as we think about fleet renewal, both in our board and with OSTA.
Thank you for that. Is there anything else? So before I adjourn, I would just like to take this opportunity to wish all of you who are here tonight a very happy and peaceful holiday season, and to wish the same to everyone who is part of the OCDSB community. That brings us to the end of our agenda, and I declare the meeting adjourned.